Thank you for joining me, Mr. Castañeda, from Mexico City. There are reports swirling around right now that your president, Peña Nieto, may not come to the United States because of all of this that's gone public today. Do you have any further news on that?
Well, Christian, I don't really know. I know that the rumors have been circulating both in Mexico City and in Washington for the last couple of hours. There has been a great outcry in Mexico City since last night when we were informed that Foreign Minister Videgaray and Trade Minister Guajardo, who are on their way to Washington to meet with negotiators today, were going to be received by President Trump's announcement of the construction of the wall, of more deportations, of federal funding for the wall, etc. All of this was seen as a slap in the face to the two ministers, and consequently people are saying that President Peña Nieto should cancel his trip to Washington next week on the 31st and perhaps do it later. This has not been confirmed yet, but apparently given the fact that President Trump is going to sign those 3 or 4 executive actions, it is quite likely that President Peña might cancel, and I think he should cancel, by the way.
Well, you think he should cancel, so let's talk about the cards that Mexico has, if any, in this ramped-up war now. But let me play devil's advocate. This is not a surprise to Mexico. Donald Trump has been saying this throughout his campaign. The wall, you'll pay for it. We're going to, have a border tax maybe. We're not going to have any more illegals, etc. And also renegotiating NAFTA. What cards does Mexico have to play in this game, as I asked at the beginning?
I think we have very powerful cards, Christian. First of all, we have the entire amount of cooperation between Mexico and the United States on issues such as drugs, Central American migrants, terrorism, security. All of that enormous amount of cooperation, which has been going on for years, depends on good faith between the two countries, depends on trust between the two countries, and depends also on a good relationship between the two governments. Mexico is not obliged to do any of this. It did a huge favor to President Obama 2.5 years ago by stopping the Central American children and other migrants on our southern border. We have no need to do that. We have no need to continue with the war on drugs now that California has legalized recreational marijuana. And we have caught over the last 15 years a large amount of people coming from other countries into Mexico seeking to go to the U.S. with perhaps not very orthodox purposes, perhaps suspects of terrorism. We are not obliged to do any of this. We do it because we believe in it and because we want to be friends with and cooperate with the United States. If the United States does not cooperate with us, we are not obliged to do this. These are powerful chips.
Well, this really does sound like both sides sort of upping the ante. But can I ask you, obviously he says that he wants to either rip up or renegotiate NAFTA. What will that mean for Mexico? Because although both sides benefit from NAFTA, Mexico could be the most economically, strapped, since it does form the backbone of your export economy. What happens if NAFTA is either ripped up or renegotiated? What do you get out of it?
Well, certainly Mexico would be more negatively affected than either Canada or the United States. We would prefer, I'm sure, to leave it as it is. We see no need to renegotiate it. Perhaps there could be side agreements that could be added to it, as President Clinton did in 1993, but that's a different story from renegotiating. Renegotiating means opening an era of uncertainty for Mexico, which would last a year, maybe 2 years. This is a very complicated process. It would have to go back to the U.S. Congress and be approved by both houses. It's a long, drawn-out process, and during that time, Christian, investment in Mexico would be halted, would be put on hold until people know what the new rules of the game are going to be. And that would be very harmful to the Mexican economy and might unleash new and greater immigration from Mexico to the United States, exactly what Trump wants to stop.
And actually, at the moment, there's a net outflow back to Mexico anyway, we understand, from Homeland Security and all the other security agencies here. But is there any area where NAFTA could be renegotiated? Is there any sort of win-win situation in a renegotiation or areas of the trade deal that could be renegotiated that wouldn't hurt Mexico as much?
I'm sure there are, but a lot depends on the way to do it. For example, if there were a way to renegotiate and increase what is called North American content for the rules of origin without opening up the treaty or agreement again, without it having to go back to the U.S. Congress, to the Canadian Parliament, and to the Mexican Senate. That could be done instead of, let's say, 65% North American content for automobiles, raise it to 80%, but without having to renegotiate or touch the treaty itself, doing it as a side agreement. That might be possible. The dispute settlement mechanisms that the Americans want to change and which could be improved, maybe they could become standing panels. If that could be done without renegotiating, that would not be a bad thing. The key issue here is that if you renegotiate, you have to go to the three legislative bodies. You have to open up a huge can of worms, and nobody knows what's going to happen to it once you start doing it. You know how it starts. You don't know how this ends.
And on that note, we have to end this. We will hopefully catch up with you as this proceeds. Jorge Castañeda, thank you for joining us from Mexico City.